No,
Welcome
here we
to
go. Now, all right, here we go. Episode 66 of the Racing Line podcast. Big episode this week, boys. Joined by Harry, Joe, and welcome back to Tristan. First time on the pod in a minute, but good to have you back to talk about the Bathurst 12 Hour this week. We'll also talk about the current developments in Formula One and what that means for the sport moving forward. But there's only one place to start, boys. There's only one place to start, and that's the Bathurst 12 Hour. And it might not have the prestige of the Bathurst 1000 or the glitz and glamour of the F1, in Melbourne. But in my heart, this might be Australia's greatest race right now.
Anthony's real love story.
I've got to say, for a first pro sort of Bathurst 12 hour since COVID, I was a little bit skeptical, like deep down in the recesses of my heart. But those sort of cynicisms and that fear was very quickly washed away. And before we sort of,
Joe?
Oh, just sort
That's
of being
fearful of.
Disappointed of it being somewhat sort of lukewarm. But very quickly I realized, we're going to have no problem here. And I just want to say, I want to start off with the best part. I never thought that 4.5 hours of green flag running could end a race so intensely. And realistically, I always think you need a safety car at the end of a Bathurst race to sort of bring you to the edge of your seat. But that race, I don't know how the race gods manufactured that ending, but that was something I've probably never witnessed before. And to have 3 cars finish within a second after a 12-hour race and that long of green running is, I think only the Almighty can answer that question for us. That was the best way to end such a fucking awesome race. I was so
happy. Answer it for you then, since I am the Almighty. But no, actually, I had 2 things, Joe. Number one, that might be the longest green flag running at Bathurst since the introduction of safety cars in any category. And number 2, they almost did 1,000 kilometers to end that race. Green running. Yeah.
No, I wholeheartedly agree, and I didn't get a chance to say it before, but thanks for having me on again. It's good to chat with you guys, especially about the 12 hour, because I did watch it and I was pretty, there was a couple of boring bits throughout the middle part of the race. It sort of like lulled out a little bit, but like you say, it did build up to quite a big finish, having those 2 Mercs go head to head, and then having Gunon and Matt Campbell, go head to head for the last probably half an hour of the race. I want to say what a drive from Gunon. I don't know too much about him, obviously being a European driver, but to be able to last basically, I think it was about 2.5 hours on those tires against, that Porsche and that Merc that had new tires on was just unbelievable. So
it was really a culmination of so many little interesting things that for those last 4 hours you sort of just left guessing. There was that whole alternate strategy with the Sun Energy 1 car. Congrats on them back-to-back winning the race. That's a great feat in really what was probably the only Pro-Am car of that pro grid.
Especially with
Kenny,
Kenny in there, for him to step up and basically put his license as pro to race with those boys was, in my opinion, pretty spectacular and pretty, like you say, gutsy, because that now opens him up to having to race against the pros for basically the remainder of his career or however long he wants to race for. So it's a pretty gutsy move, but he's a Bathurst 12-hour champion because of it. So
2-time Bathurst 12-hour champion.
That's one thing he really wanted. He speaks a lot about, going to the mountain and working under Brock in Brock's team. He's bought real estate on the mountain. And I think ever since it's been an intercontinental round, he's never missed a race. There's word that next year he's going to bring Willpower down and to race in the Sun Energy AMG as well, which will be awesome. But I always talk about, Australians sort of creating these stories in motorsport, and this really is someone sort of putting his big boy pants on and saying, I'm gonna have a crack. And the strategy really needed to be alternate. They had to really sort of use those early, what are they, safety car periods, put him in the car for those times as much as possible. And then realistically, that they had the pace to be thereabouts. There was a little bit of sort of fortuitousness with Engel sort of diving down at the end of the chase and getting that drive through. Because I think that Group M AMG was, it honestly felt like Chaz in the walk and tour 2 years ago. Like they
2021 Bathurst.
They had unlocked something that none of the cars could really rival. And then even at the end, I thought, okay, it's going to be a sort of a Merc off, but Matt Campbell in that Porsche, it was probably an hour of nearly qualifying laps. Like the intensity was so high.
He had to, and he nearly wrote the car off trying on quite a few occasions because he was just pushing so hard, and that's Shane Van Gisbergen spec. What we saw in, I think it was 2016 in the Bathurst 12-hour, where Shane passed that car on the grass basically, and it's just like win it or bin it, and I honestly think that's the only level of driving that Matt could do to be able to win that race, because they were severely underpowered on that straight. And you got to take your hat off to the guys that won. I was sitting there beating myself up trying to think, A, how they got in the lead, having 4 extra pit stops than anyone. And then B, how they're there at the end of the race when mathematically it just doesn't seem possible. Like they're giving up almost 2 minutes in extra time in just transit alone in the pit lane. So somehow they've come out and just managed their strategy to absolute perfection to be able to come out on, in front and be the car to pass, I guess, during crunch time. So
what do you guys think about the whole, how it's a very different sort of pit stop strategy that you have to run in that race compared to a normal Bathurst 1000, in terms of you have to refuel the car first and then do everything after that. So you really are like sort of sacrificing fuel for time has a much bigger sort of trade-off. And then also even like
sacrificing fresh tires for time.
Well,
pretty much.
But you could sacrifice fuel, and then if your car can make fuel, you'll get a couple seconds advantage. So there's a really big trade-off. I found that probably the most fascinating. Like it is one of the most fascinating parts of it, because you can sort of see real differences in the pit stops by like seconds when the Porsche comes in, and their pit stops were so good, and they were so fast. And you see,
on average like 8 seconds pit stop faster than anyone else, and it's amazing. Like you consider where they were at the end of the race, and all that time adds up. Like
I think it was like,
sorry, you go, H.
That's all right. Sorry, I think it was one of the most interesting parts of it for me was
sounded like H.
We all look the same.
Yeah. Where the people were making up their time. It was like someone said it in the commentary, but obviously you had the Audi that was the fastest around the top. You had the Mercedes that was the fastest up and down the hill. And then you had Porsche that was there or thereabouts. They weren't the fastest anywhere, but they were kind of they were good. And
but even like the BMW at stages were in the cooler temperatures, it was there. And I was like, here we go. And then by the end of the race, it just didn't have the legs.
But it was just such a, like, without having the safety car and the bunching up, I think there was still enough intrigue purely based on people trying to keep the powder dry, not giving away too much, kind of for the most part playing a pretty safe game, with the exception of Sun Energy. One thing that they do have to get quite a lot of credit for, I think, if you're Sun Energy, is when they did have all those pit stops early on, no one could have assumed that there was going to be such a long section running towards the end of the race that was green. But to their credit, they got Kenny in the car, did got his driving time, done as quickly as possible. Because if they had have been a little bit more traditional with how they, how these teams tend to space out their driving, then he would have had to go in the car late again, and that probably wouldn't have given them the win. So the fact that they were, proactive enough to bring the car in more often whenever there was a safety car, to get Kenny in the car, whenever there was that safety car, because even safety car is driving time, gave the other two, and kudos has to go to them, because they did 8 hours by themselves to finish the race. So kudos has to go to them to Stoltz and Gunon for how they, finished the race and the stamina that they displayed. But the intricacy and the strategy throughout the race was awesome. And the reality is, with the pace that the Mercedes displayed on Saturday, and just their Bathurst, you make passes up and down the chutes, and no one was going to really take it to them into the braking zones purely based on the top speeds that they were able to generate. So it was an awesome race, really awesome.
One thing as well that I think was a stroke of genius was Kenny Habul said, I want to win the race outright. And the reason they went to pro was because you have a lot more flexibility with your driver time going down that sort of rabbit hole. And then you look at sort of what actually happened behind them. So with Pro-Am, you have to actually put a Pro-Am in the car for an hour in the last hour of the race. Nice picture, Tristan. I like that. Whereas, and then you even see like with the Silver Cup cars, like Chaz's Audi was pretty close to the front runners in that first half of the race. But then with such an extended green flag running, and then how they sort of get stuck, they got stuck behind the safety car and then released. They would never have stood a chance. So like that was a decision that they made before the race had even started, that then in retrospect probably altered the total trajectory of that race for them.
Well, the minimum driving time for a pro is much less than the minimum driving time for the AM in a Pro-Am team.
Yeah, but also the AM has to do an hour in the second half of the race, which would have totally screwed them.
But for the Sun Super, wasn't it, that one?
Sun Energy.
Yeah. So for them to have navigated that strategy, all the drivers, the pit crew, the engineers, pretty much everybody involved in that whole entire outfit had to be pretty much 100% on board with the strategy. I think from the get-go, they had devised this pretty crazy strategy to go after some of those probably more powered cars to be able to be in the lead at the end of the race. And I think it might have been Chad Nayland during the commentary who said that they have to be pretty much simpatico with each other. They have to understand what's at stake. They have to understand that if their strategy doesn't work, it's a massive risk. It's a big gamble, but if it does work, it'll pay off. And it's like I said, like you trying to get those three drivers, all the engineers, the mechanics, et cetera, on board with a strategy that ludicrous is just insane. And the fact that they pulled that off and were able to win the race, it just highlights how far, I guess, ahead these European teams are in retrospect to our Australian teams. I think Triple Eight were the closest Australian team to really give it to them. And to be completely honest, I thought they were pretty underperforming all weekend. Apart from maybe Brock Feeney's lap in qualifying. They were pretty quick early on in the race, but other than that, I think something must have happened and they lost a lot of speed. So
they made a few rookie mistakes towards the end. I say that with quotations because they're not rookies, but they made a few mistakes towards the end of the race that you wouldn't expect a team like that to make. And they probably were expecting a
safety car at some point.
A safety car towards the end of the race, which would be understandable. But I think one thing as well while you're watching it was due to the fact that the grid was smaller. Once you had those accidents at the start of the race, there ends up being a lot more space to sort of run your own race, find some clean air, and just pump out some killer laps. And I think by that time, like a lot of the battles in the sort of midfield, like for the Pro-Am and for the Silver Cup, somewhat got easier as those crashes came to place. Like there was one stage when the international racing Audi, kudos to them as well. I like when international teams come in and win a class.
Like us.
So I'm happy that the Kiwis got that Silver Cup win. But like they were a couple laps ahead, so you would expect that they would have just been like in that category, sort of just cruising, hitting numbers, and make sure they didn't ruin it for themselves. So I think that also made it a little bit more I don't know, you wouldn't use the word chill, but there just was more space for everyone to sort of hit their own rhythm. And I think that lends itself to not
I
having
think also when
a
teams
safety
see
car.
cars, there was a period when they were dropping like flies. There were a lot of cars that were in the walls in a very short succession. I think it also makes everyone just kind of chill out because there was a very high attrition rate at early stage in the race. But 2 points that kind of just came into my mind that I did want to raise. Number one, and it kind of is taken from what Tristan was saying before. I think what we saw, Triple Eight is a Supercars team that runs Mercedes, and when debatably the strongest Mercedes team in Europe came down to Bathurst, I think we saw a little bit of a difference in just performance, and that's probably understandable just based on a CODIS. Their bread and butter is GT racing, their bread and butter is the Mercedes AMG, and as professional as Triple Eight are, really they run 4 races a year or 6 races a year. They're all 1 hour races. The Mercedes and the rest of the Supercar. So they're probably just not as in tune setting the car up as a CODIS, and obviously the drivers themselves, their drivers, as talented as they are, and SVG's as talented as they come, he just doesn't drive that car nearly as much as the other blokes. So that was the first point that I thought was understandable. And the second one that, just coming back to the Sun Energy guys and Kenny Hubble, and something that probably hasn't been appreciated enough. So I just wanted to raise it. When we've got these guys that are driving, 3 guys in one car, they're setting the car up for, so that it's suitable for all 3 drivers. Now, in a pro car, if the car isn't perfectly suited to any of those drivers, they're professional enough, experienced enough to drive around the problem just purely based on the amount of hours that they kind of do in the car. But I think kudos has to go to that team also, because they set that car up so that 3 drivers could drive it, one of them being an AM. Right? So it's going to obviously be a little bit more stable, a little bit less aggressive,
more safe
than the other pro cars that were in the category, and they were still able to make it work. So the fact that they were able to tailor the car so that it was suitable for an AM driver and still show the performance that they did, a lot of kudos has to go to them. And obviously they're the best team in Europe, the CODIS group, and I think it really showed because they did an impeccable job.
I agree. I wanted to add to that because Dave Reynolds made an interesting point during their commentary. He said that I'd rather know the car than the track, and I mean that echoed through me because I would 100% agree. It's I mean, maybe with the exception of a Bathurst or a Nordschleife, but 100% you want to know the car, because then you're capable of knowing what it can do, what it can't do, the limitations of that. And you got these German drivers and the Italians who jump in this car who pretty much live in it. They might as well pay rent in that driver's seat. And you get out, like you say, some of our guys who just jump in it for a bit of fun or possibly a chance to win the Bathurst 12 hour. And like you say, they might have only done a day or 2 testing throughout the year in that car if they're lucky. I don't think Chaz had any running time in that Audi before he jumped in that this year, apart from maybe some of the GT stuff he did earlier on, either last year or the year before. And you got guys like Gizzy and Brock who occasionally jump in that car just because they've got free time or they can or whatever. But like you say, their bread and butter is driving a supercar, V8 powered, running on Dunlops, which is a completely different bag of frogs compared to those, Pirelli super softs or, the soft slick tires that they're running on. It's a completely different ball game. And like you say, you got these turbos, you got the ABS and stability control, and you don't have to change gears. There's just so many different variables that you've got to consider when you're driving a GT car versus a supercar. So, and like I said, it did highlight a few issues for Triple Eight and some of our Aussie run teams. But I think that, that'll only ever push them harder and make them a better team, because they'll get to learn from those mistakes, what went wrong at the 12 hour, and they'll bring that to supercars and, be bigger and better for it.
You can also imagine how different it is running that let's say the AMG with brand new Pirellis on a fuel tank, on a full tank, and then, pretty decent ones on an empty tank. And then you've fill it up again with the same tires, and then 2.5 hours later you empty again, but on totally, worn tires. So there is a massive learning curve that they're never going to touch. I think a few honorable mentions from the race I want to sort of shout out. Number one, I think when the sports bet Audi, Chaz's Audi with Liam Talbot and Fraser Ross went a lap down after their
Which time in the race?
Yeah, early on in the race. Chaz was ringing that thing like an absolute demon. And I know you said our boys don't, they just don't have that seat time in the cars. You would not have known that Chaz did not have seat time in that car.
Yeah.
Because it was probably a lot more him, making up for the lack thereof. But that car was, at that stage, was on rails, and at the time it looked like the fastest car,
I think
on the track.
they did the fastest lap of the race, didn't they?
Yeah.
That car.
Yeah.
And that's pretty amazing for a Pro-Am car. I know they're pretty much the same spec, but, completely different levels of driver talent. You got 3 pros basically sharing a car in those Mercs and that Porsche and the BMWs, but you got 1 pro basically leading the way in that car that on multiple occasions put them back within contention in that race and got them back on the lead lap. I think you got to take your hat off to what Chaz was able to accomplish, but also got to applaud what the other 2 boys were able to do, because like we make no disregard on it that they're amateur drivers racing against some of the best drivers in the world. So
and they had a mission, they had to win Pro-Am, and they did it. So
yeah,
you sort
exactly.
of you race to your conditions. You don't need to come 4th overall if you're going to get the same trophy.
Yeah, correct.
I think also Brock Feeney's pole, what is it called? Top 10, their version of the top 10
his qualifying
shootout
lap and then his pole
Yeah.
lap, his top 10 shootout lap. Yeah.
To break the qualifying record at the mountain and only be bested by Mara Engel by, a hair. What an absolute blinding performance. I also wanted to shout out the friends of the pod, the Valmont car.
How good was that
terrible.
livery?
Terrible.
Was that Aaron Cameron's one?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was an awesome looking livery.
So for that car to get into the top 10 shootout, silver car, I thought
2 years in a row.
Yeah, 2 years in a row. But like this year, I thought had realistically shouldn't have been there. Like if you looked at it on paper. So for them boys to sort of wrestle that in and get it into the top 10 shootout, awesome effort by them. The race didn't pan out how I know a lot of them wanted it to go, but for the 3.5 to 4 hours that they were in it, they showed really, they were at the top of their field and they showed really good pace. So I hope that doesn't dishearten them from having another crack next year. And then my last shout out was the International Motorsport team from New Zealand, because I love when international teams come in. Oh, actually, sorry. I love the team who rocked up with the KTM Expo.
Yeah, switched to the Audi.
And finished the race in the Audi R8. That is the
that's cool.
Probably the story of the weekend, especially to finish it after you you do all your practice and everything in a different car.
Good on
awesome
Supercars as well for having a bit of leniency, realizing the situation, also realizing that they're probably in a position where that the more cars the better, with the grid still not being
especially after last year,
the capacity it used to be. And they got a they went race. They said they were going to come to race. They put a lot of money into running the KTM. It didn't work out, and good on them for
allowing
pivoting
to it.
It was a bit of a shame because I had to drop Juice, Jaden and Jeddah, but I think Jaden understands that, like you say, these boys are there to go racing, and because of his license structure, he's no longer eligible to drive that car in that class. So, it was a shame to not see the Juice on the track, but it was also really cool to see that car, or that team, I should say, at least able to operate. What I was going to jump in and say was my take from the weekend, despite everything that happened, and there was a lot that happened, but how impressed I was with Brock Feeney, and I've always been a big fan of Brock. I was really happy that Triple Eight sort of threw a lot of their eggs into his basket. Because to me, that's quite reminiscent of what they're expecting this season in Supercars to be. You know, I'm almost confident that they're expecting him to go out and start contending for race wins, consecutive podiums, you know, pole positions, and et cetera, and put a really good championship campaign together. I saw that he's got a lot of that potential on the weekend. He was definitely their guy, and they had some bloody good drivers in that team.
To think that he was lined up to finish the race for them in that double stint, you know, at the end of the race, showed how much faith in his pace that they had, you know, because especially with Giza, you would never really think that he would be playing sort of third fiddle in that team, which he ended up sort of doing. And I can't remember the other driver in that.
Did anyone else think that Giza was a little bit underwhelming this week? Just in general,
I think
I
they
don't
took
know
the
if it was
expectation
underwhelming.
off him, and I think they put the saddle on Brock's back, to be completely honest, and they just said to Shane, just go and do your thing, do whatever. But I honestly saw that they made Brock step up this week as a result of maybe him underperforming in some ways last season. You know, I know he stuck onto the podium and he got that last win in Supercars for the Holden, which is something that was unbelievable because that was all him. But to me, I thought this weekend was about, all right, let's see what this kid can do. We're going to put the world on his shoulders and see if he can handle it, because this year he's going to have a lot thrown at him. And that's personally why I saw Shane playing, you know, I guess you say second or third fiddle to the team, because I think they said to him, like, step back and we want to see what this kid can do.
another honourable mention I think we have to talk about this week was the other Triple Eight
Something
car.
just fell.
With Richie Stanaway, mate. Keeps impressing every time he gets back in the car. Keeps on impressing. Keeps on doing what he needs to do to turn heads. And I think the Boost Mobile car had a pretty, you know, solid race. Did nothing spectacular, but one thing that was definitely there was Richie Stanaway and his pace. It's no surprise considering his history in GT racing, but it was just good to see him back.
I agree.
Again, a second time at Bathurst, a second time putting in a really good performance. He's done what, 12 hours now around Bathurst in the last couple of months without crashing, without really making any mistakes. So I think if there's ever a job interview where kind of you show what you can do with, you know, without making mistakes, I think he's done that. So it would be good to see him back in Supercars based on these displays, because there really is some talent there that you know, that needs to be displayed in Supercars. But one thing that I did hear from Peter Adderton today, which was interesting, and
Did you say you heard from him?
I read something from him.
Isn't that rare?
Pardon?
Isn't that rare? I thought he's very sort of hard to get a word out of him.
Oh,
Peter
really? Not on
Adderton?
social media?
No.
Well, technically, I pay my mobile fee to Boost, so he might be my employer if I pay him, right? But anyway, going back to
that's a good way to look at it.
I like listening to Pete Adderton because he's in the game, but he's not afraid to speak his mind. And one thing that was
True, it is.
I'll give him some credit for this. He said it's hard enough to get local sponsors to invest in this huge Australian race, and then you've got these local teams running Futures and Boost and, you know, whatever it might be,
Super cheap auto, and the distribution of, you know, screen time for the cars that were at the track was in no way consistent. Now, the argument can be made that obviously if you want to get more screen time, get to the front. But excuse me. But in a race with classes, and, you know, in such a long race, you know, a 12-hour race, there probably should have been a little bit more screen time for all of the teams, particularly if there is some level of I don't think that's a
strategy.
real argument.
Pardon?
I would say I watched 8 hours of that race pretty consistently, probably even more, but let's say 8 hours. And I think realistically, most of the cars were showing for a decent amount of time. And realistically as well, one would say number one, his car wasn't even was never really close to the lead of his class, let alone the lead of the race. But people are watching the race to see the leaders of the race. If you want to have the most screen time, you spend the big dollars and put a team at the front of the grid that's going to race for an overall win. And that's as dickheaded as that might sound to someone who's sort of just a fan, like I don't like when that shit's going down with the Manti and the two AMGs. I really don't give a shit what's happening with the boost car that's coming fourth in Pro-Am. Like, and that's the reality of it. Like that.
I agree to that. Like that happened to me at Bathurst. I had this awesome scrap for the lead of the race. And this is actually the complete opposite. So I'm actually sort of contradicting you guys, but I had this awesome battle for the lead of the race with one of the, I think it was Drew Russell. And like after everything that happened, whatever, I come into the pits half expecting like, oh, did you guys see that? Like that was pretty cool. Like I bet you would have been pretty stoked about that. And they're like, no, we didn't see anything. Like, what do you mean? And they're like, oh, well, we saw a Suzuki Swift running around in 58th place.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, cool. So when I'm old and grey and I want to show my grandkids, you know, how good I was back in the day, I'm going to be able to show them like my name at the top of the leaderboard and then a Suzuki Swift running around in 58th place. Do you know what I mean? So, and it's like, for me, that was a pretty cool moment to have been having that battle with such an experienced race car driver in Drew Russell and to be fighting for the leader race, but to have nothing to show for it, really, you know. So it does go both ways. It's like you want to see everyone get their fair amount of screen time. You want to see, you know, the cars that are entering and making up the numbers that are actually just happy to be there. You know, tell everyone that they're racing at Bathurst. You want to see them on the TV, because it's a cool story. But at the end of the day, we want to see who's winning the race. We don't really care for anyone who's not. So. I think that's the sad reality of it, is that we want to see winners and we don't really care about the losers.
But I don't even think it's a sad reality. I think it really is just the reality.
Yeah, true.
Like when,
it's true.
When it is such a captivating race, if the race is done and like there's a leader who's, you know, a lap and a half ahead, okay, there's time to have, you know, stories and show different cars, you know, that's fine. But when your main focus is, you know, and supercars do probably one of the best sort of TV packages in international motorsport. The way they cut between cars and track is, and so seamlessly with pit as well. Like without being biased, is probably second. Is probably only bested by maybe Formula One and then the Le Mans sort of race once a year. Other than that, I don't think anyone does it.
When Verstappen's winning, you barely see that.
Dude, I go for Williams. I never fucking see those cars. It's fine. You know,
yeah, but when Verstappen's out front by 35 seconds, you don't see him. But you see the guys running in 10th battling.
They cut to him as about to cross the line at the end.
What's that, sorry?
They cut to him as they're about to cross the line at the end.
Yeah, that's pretty much Red Bull's only exposure for the whole Grand Prix.
That's a testament. That's a testament of how good he is or how bad the product is in terms of the midfield. Yeah. But even like touching on the Peter Adderton thing, like I've been a massive proponent to getting him on the grid, but I also think there comes a time, and I mean this in the most respectful way possible, but I think sometimes you need to shut the fuck up, because it comes a stage where you keep banging on that door so much and it starts being like friendly jest, and then it sort of just becomes sort of being annoying.
Look, I do have. Can I just
be the devil's advocate for a second?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
what if he is the voice in the room that actually, because a lot of people in the supercars paddock kind of play the company game, right? What if there is genuine issues to find sponsorship for this race? Sure. I'm not saying every race, but what if it's harder than we think to find sponsorship for this race?
I can tell you how hard it is.
And there are local teams that kind of, it's not easy for them to get the budget to go racing, and maybe we'd see more of them if it was easier. So what if he's just the person in the room that maybe he says it a little bit brashly, maybe he doesn't say it as politically correct as we would like, but I would say that for him to say it, there's probably still an element of truth to it. Now, it's probably not going to
It's
it's probably not the greatest thing you want to see, particularly if you're
Mm.
getting, some racing towards the back end of the field. But the argument can also be made that in a 12-hour race, and we've already said that there was some lulls during the race as well.
yeah.
In a 12-hour race, I mean, even just get them in when they're taking a pit stop, you know what I mean? Like, I think there would be some element of truth to what he's saying.
Dude, I saw that car more than enough. I don't think I didn't see one car on that grid enough.
But we don't know.
I don't.
Like,
I don't.
maybe you can speak to this, Tristan. So when you do the Bathurst 6-hour,
Yeah.
ballpark figure, what kind of budget do you need to cobble together?
Ends, man. If you want to go win, you're looking probably above 50K at least.
Mm.
I mean, depends on, like I said, if that's that was for the three of us, probably
Yeah.
I think about 60 something K, but you're looking at going and running probably a class winning car, you're looking somewhere about 15 to 20K.
And
And that just, that gets bigger and bigger and bigger the faster the car and the better the team. So, for us, I think we were looking somewhere about 60 to probably budgeting about 75K maximum.
and how many people do you have to talk to find that money? Like, obviously not just people that are paying you, but people that also turn you down. So
Dude, for us, man, it kind of does hurt, but we went after a lot of big sponsors that we thought would benefit them to get into the sport. We went after we went after Super Cheap, and I will admit we went after Boost Mobile. We went after Sportsbet. We went after quite a few of them to because at the end of the day, you're trying to think of what companies might want to spend money in Australian motorsport or in motorsport in general, because it's such an expensive sport. And for the most part, I mean, apart from the love and passion of it, they don't get a lot back.
Mm.
So you try and give back where and if you can. And obviously being at the front of the field helps, give your sponsors some exposure. But we were pretty lucky that we had, obviously our family sponsor in Chalgrave Contracting. We had a few other local sponsors around, the Gold Coast that we were able to find and contribute to us getting onto the grid and merchandise deals and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it all adds up. So at that level, like the Bathurst 6-hour or support category level, every single cent counts. At the level of Bathurst 12-hour / V8 Supercars, Formula One, NASCAR, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, you're talking millions and millions of dollars that you need in sponsorship per year to be able to go and race. And it's quite scary how people find that money, because it doesn't grow on trees and not a lot of people want to spend it. So the Peter Adderton thing is, this guy wants to spend his money. He wants to go racing. So why doesn't Supercars let him? Then there's the contradictory argument to that this guy's never run a race team.
Mm.
You can't just go and, I guess, buy a team and expect to win when you've never done Super 3, you've never done Super 2, you've never done Porsche, you've never done anything prior to that apart from sponsor a racing car. So, I've heard quite a bit of, I guess, controversy from other team owners in Supercars and just other people around the paddock that say, look, if you want to get into the Supercars, go put a car in Super 2. Go buy a team in Super 2, prove to us that you can win in that, then come into Supercars. And you'll have more experience under your belt. You'll have a team that's behind you. You'll have everything set up. Yeah, exactly. And
pay your dues even.
Correct. And that's, you saw MSR, I actually saw they did some GT stuff. They did some Super 2, they did Super 3. And then eventually they got into Supercars, and it's like, okay, well, we've got a pretty good foundation in Stone Brothers racing. Now we've got, our background in Super 3, Super 2, some GT racing, and now we're ready to go race Supercars. So,
yeah, I think
for me, it's probably it is a hard topic to sort of, because there's two like very conflicting sides. One is, he's willing to come in and bring a lot of money, which is really the lifeblood of the sport, unfortunately or unfortunately. But then I do think there's a sort of way to go about it with, a bit more tact and a bit more respect. especially when you see a team like even like Blanchard Racing, who's has really started from the bottom and they're building a pretty decent organization, and they've at least for the last couple of years been very vocal about getting another rec to run a second car, and you would definitely understand if they were peeved if all of a sudden Boost Mobile gets 2 cars added to the sport. Now,
But
my
Blanchard
argument
didn't
is
just jump into the sport. They bought it from Sydney Motorsport, who bought it from Techno, who bought it
but
from
even
someone
like
else.
even they sponsored a car for a long time, through multiple teams before they even had their own
for sure.
foray into it. So I understand there are many sort of facets of it that really take probably a deep dive, and I think realistically the only way it's going to get sorted is if the teams come together at the end of a year or something and have a proper sit down and discuss it.
I'm all for more racing, just so you know. I'm all for more recs. I don't care who it is. I just want to see more cars on the grid because it creates better racing.
I'll watch a tractor series if it was good racing.
I think Supercars has the ability to run 30 cars, but I would say if they wanted to run 30 cars, you would need to have a very good vetting process for which cars you let on the grid.
But do more wildcard stuff, like.
Well, whenever there's those big wildcard races and the grid sort of swells a bit, I think that's probably always one of the more interesting races of the year, because you get like a moment like Zach Best getting pole out of nowhere, and you'll never get
with
those
super tires.
Yeah, look at where Chaz Mostert is in his career, and that all started from basically a lease deal from DJR, wasn't it?
DJR,
and you look at where he is now in his career, and that was basically a wild card. They didn't call it a wild card back then, but it was essentially a wild card. You look at Zach Best, this kid's, pretty much tipped to be one of the next big up and coming drivers in the sport.
What's Zach Best doing this year? Because he's not with Tickford.
I believe he's doing Super 2.
With another team though?
Not sure.
Because Tickford released their Super 2 lineup last year, and they're
Ellie Morrow and
who was the other bloke?
Is it Vaughan? Something Vaughan?
Yeah, but it wasn't Zach Best. So I was surprised.
This was the most seamless and unplanned transition from GT racing into Supercars.
Yeah, I'm going to try to deviate back because I need to get Harry speaking on this bloody podcast.
True,
so
I know. I think he tried to before.
Formula One land, because this poor bloke looks like he's ready to put a shotgun to the head. So.
I did want to ask, what was the atmosphere like there? Like you said, there was about 53,000 people over the weekend.
Yeah.
What was it like on the ground?
The beautiful thing about the Bathurst 12 hour is that there's a lot of people there. It's obvious it's nowhere near as much as the Bathurst 1000. Like, let's not kid ourselves. Like the cultural significance of the Bathurst 1000 cannot be topped by the 12 hour. But the beautiful thing about the 12 hour is that it's everything in relation to the atmosphere of the event is always uber positive, but at the same time it feels like a small race in that there's space for you to see, there's heaps of good vantage points. It's not like the 1000 where if you get there on race day and you haven't camped there for a day and a half, you're squeezing through people to try to get a glimpse from some of the good vantage points. Whereas the 12 hour, I rocked up at 8:30, 9 o'clock, and I literally pitched a cool cabana on the last corner, and there was more than enough room for me to do it. There were people helping me do it as well because I had Jerome there too. So it's a big race. It feels there are elements of it that make it feel like a big race, but as a spectator, it doesn't have the intensity or the anxiety associated with the Bathurst 1000, which makes it really enjoyable.
Because next year, I've already made a plan. We're going to get a hotel room and watch it from the top of that hotel, though. So anyone who wants to come down,
that Ridges, if you haven't been to that Ridges, that is the coolest place to stay for a motor racing event. I know the camping is the best way to, experience the full festivities of it. But that Ridges, standing on our balcony at I think it was 6 a.m. when all those cars started going around at the 6 hour, and you're just looking around damn, this is cool. You look up, you got the, the horizon coming on the front mountain there, which is basically just reminiscing that Mount Panorama sign, and it is honestly the best backdrop you can wake up to, I think.
All right. So here's the plan. 2024 live podcast off the balcony of the Ridges.
Done.
I'm
Tristan's
down, mate.
flying. Tristan's
in.
flying down from Queensland.
I'm in.
Live streaming off camera. Let's get it done.
We're in. Let's do it.
That means we have to do the Gold Coast as well, the Gold Coast Supercars
Oh,
race.
okay. Yeah, we could get a nice apartment or something and backdrop onto like Turn 8 or something in Gold Coast.
Let's do it.
I'm
I'll
down for
lock
that.
down.
Some plans.
I'll
Well,
lock-
just to bring it back, boys, because we are here to talk about motorsport. Harry, let's get
Cool.
you in. Let's bring you into this pod, mate. So introduce yourself. What's your name? It's been a while. Formula One. Some interesting news this week. Come out of, last week I kind of said there was whispers that Ford might be joining. 2 days later, Ford say big news coming out tomorrow. Be ready for it. Out of nowhere, and they're on a Red Bull. What do you make of it? What's your insight? Formula One says they want 2 more cars by 2025 as well. How does that change the conversation we had last week, which was pretty negative about the situation?
I just think, Ford teaming up with Red Bull. So we've got now Ferrari, Ford, Audi,
Renault.
and Mercedes. So there's 6 engine
And
manufacturers.
apparently Honda, isn't it?
Well, Honda will be back.
And Cadillac.
Apparently Honda's back.
Honda will jump in and then they'll tap out, then they'll jump back in again.
If you're getting Audi as well.
No, I
Maddie,
think
you
I
mentioned Audi.
Yeah,
Oh, did you? Oh.
but let GM in, let Andretti in. It's frustrating. Like, I don't know. Everyone's heard us talk about it, but Tristan, what are your thoughts on the whole Andretti GM
Yeah,
thing?
well, he's the Pete Adderton of F1, isn't he? So I
He's a bit more
am.
respectful.
I said it before. More cars, the better. I think you've got to have the right foundations to be able to set up a racing team. Andretti have proven through not only just recent history, but their history that they deserve to have a spot in F1 and they deserve to be a household name in F1, especially if Cadillac, or I think it's Cadillac with Chevrolet backing coming into the sport. That's a lot of money to be able to throw around basically at their disposal. I'm all for it, man. I just want better racing. At the moment, F1's hit this sort of lull where I know pretty much what Supercars was, who's going to win, and I want to just see people just bang doors, bang side pods, go wheel to wheel, race for the ultimate prize of being world champion. And I think the more cars, the better. More American teams, clearly this Drive to Survive has worked for America because we're starting to see a lot of American sponsored teams, American, interest, and obviously now teams wanting to join from America. I think it's unreal. I think it's what F1's been missing for quite some time is the American money.
I guess that's true. That's definitely true. But the product on track last year would suggest that, and we spoke about this last week, how long are those fans going to hang around if the product on the track isn't great? And Anthony and I were talking today, and what you say, you're giving it 4 races this year?
I'm giving it 4 races before I make any predictions.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
I
fair
also
enough.
said I wouldn't be surprised if next year I die to Formula One.
You just said you'll watch tractors go around the track, so I don't believe that part. But
Why?
Yeah, I said if it's
Why is that?
competitive.
Why are you giving
I
up
said
on
if it's
Formula One?
No, I don't know if I will, because I've been a Formula One fan for the longest time, but I feel like it's disheartening when a lot of other motorsports around are seeing glaring issues and rectifying them.
And F1's not.
GT3 V8 Supercars, even though it's taken them 3 years to figure it out.
Well, that's still TBC if that's rectified some of the issues. But
Yeah, well, exactly. But yeah, at the very least, there is, I don't know, intelligence in the design, if that makes sense. Like, it seems like what they've said they're going to do, at the very least, makes sense. Whereas Formula One, like, I don't know, I just feel like there's still too many, cooks in the kitchen. I feel like in the absence of making the best decisions for the sport, you've got these people that are still thinking about the bottom dollar.
Mhm.
But one thing that does interest me, and I think it's really good for the sport, is this: if for F1 has greenlit Ford's return to the sport, then I can't imagine them not seeing the benefit of having Cadillac as well.
Well,
Or at the very least, the GM
he's-
Ford
I think
rivalry.
H was going to. What were you going to say, H?
I was just going to offer a little bit of pushback to Anthony's point on the product, and I understand where you're coming from, and I agree. Last year was pretty poor in terms of one car dominating everyone, but it was the first year of new regs, and we saw in the last set of regulations as it progressed through, the cars slowly caught up. Mercedes was still dominant, but the midfield battle was pretty epic for the last 3 or 4 years within those regulations. So
But you know what's interesting? Before the regulations, before the previous regulation, the last big change in 2009, I think it was, we saw 10 different winners in the first 10 rounds. And I understand that by that time, engine development was, full beans for all teams. So they kind of all had, I think it might have been 10 years of that particular engine system or something to that effect. But that's why I said I don't really want to make any determinations about it until round 4, because either you're going to see Red Bull picking up where they left off, hopefully, and it looks like Mercedes are going to close the gap. But my biggest concern is the other teams. And I need to see what the cost cap does to bring the field back together.
I'm not going to let anybody. I'm not
Pardon?
going to let anybody rain on my Formula One parade today,
because Williams is releasing their car tonight, right?
Because in a couple of hours we're releasing our livery, the most hope-filled day of my season. So no one's going to shit on F1 today.
Talk about a car that could use some boost livery. Yeah. Maybe the Williams could get on board with Peter Adderton.
Hey, Joseph, I just wanted to ask, what's your undying loyalty to Williams? Is it nostalgia?
100%.
No, it's just it's definitely nostalgia, but it's more just like with all my sports teams, when I make a bad decision to follow a shit sport team, there's an undying commitment to that team until they go bust. So I've been telling Anthony, I swear to God, if Williams don't get their shit together, I don't want them to get sold. I just want them to go bust. So when they get rid of that organization, I'll go for a new team.
Bro, I can't tell you, bro. I go for the Brisbane Lions, North Queensland Cowboys, Dallas Cowboys. I go for the Heat. I don't know. I could keep going on and on. Pretty much every team that I go for just falls short.
And you never change, but you never change, and that has to be respected.
True, fair enough.
I feel like one thing that is lost in the modern, and this is not even motorsport anymore. This is just life. I feel like these young fans in anything, they follow people, and they follow for a while, and they change to whoever is the next
winning at the time. Bandwagon fans.
I've come to realize as well.
Irks me.
Life is too short to sell your soul to a team who doesn't give a fuck about your feelings. All right. Now, realistically, we're the idiots who don't even notice this for way too long.
Yeah,
these young kids are just like, you know what? I'm gonna live my life. I'm gonna buy 6 jerseys. I'm gonna go for Messi at PSG. I'm gonna go for Tom Brady because they're like stock investors. If they're not getting a return, they just jump ship.
But the elation that they feel,
the elation that I feel
the
when
win
Williams
is
gets
nothing
1 point.
like you. It's nothing like you would feel when George Russell got a podium for 20 laps,
man.
100%,
dude.
Like, you know what I mean? Like,
it's like
100%, man.
On the 3-lap race.
I'm a perfect.
You tell him, Harry.
I'm a hardcore Walkinshaw fan, and the only thing I remember from my wedding day was that Walkinshaw, while I wasn't watching it, won their first race in like 6 or 7 years. And I remember someone saying to me, Scott Pye won at Albert Park. And I said, get fucked. And he goes, yeah. And then I had to go and pretend to go to the bathroom to watch the highlights at my own wedding.
No way, on your wedding. Well, actually, I was going to mention that because I was on Facebook just before this and I saw a Walkinshaw post. I think it was like a little sneak peek of Chaz sitting in the Mustang. And some of the bigotry comments that I read on there, I'm just like, these fans don't actually understand their history of the sport. Tom Walkinshaw used to drive a bloody Ford.
I want to see this now. What did they? But
Oh,
but I will say this though. I will
And
say
I
this.
just found it so funny.
I feel like as a team, Walkinshaw is going to have a very difficult year because
You reckon?
the legacy that they've created in terms of the Holden name, and we said it last year, they haven't been the Holden racing team by name for a long time, but Triple Eight have never had the backing, since the changeover that Walkinshaw, had, even when they were doing shit. They were doing like finishing 16th and 17th at the top end. And I remember, for a couple of years, and the fans still, followed them. I think it's because realistically, it wasn't about their results. It was sort of like a way of life. If you had a Holden, or if your family had a Holden,
Yeah, for sure,
in the
man.
70s, that's what it was.
We're a long way past that. Like, these cars aren't even reminiscent of a Ford Mustang or a Chevrolet Camaro. So
Don't say that, man. We've just come back to that. We have to be
I think
positive about the
I'm
change.
saying it in a positive way. Like, the sport isn't what it used to be. It's not win on Sunday, sell on Monday. They're a purpose-built race car. They're, designed in a factory. Everyone's, and for the most part, got the same equipment. And the cars themselves aren't reminiscent of what's on the road. So this whole Goliath battle of, I go for Ford or I go for Holden, and I see blue, I see red. It's sort of like old school, and it's good for the sport because it creates rivalry, but it also isn't necessary right now, because it's like this whole thing with what Walkinshaw are going for. Everyone's going, oh, like, how can you guys trade on us? And unbelievable, like, we won't go for you. And it's like, you don't actually realize that their heritage started out with Ford. Tom Walkinshaw used to race a Ford, and this is a comment that I made before. And it's like, people are just so oblivious to history that they have to attack what's happening right now. It's like, Walkinshaw couldn't get factory backing with GM, from what I've heard. I don't know if that's 100% accurate, but Ford were offering them factory backing. So, for a racing team, they're not going to deny that money. We've spoken already about how hard it is to get. So when Ford offer their NASCAR support, their touring car support around the world, their GT support, and they're giving them factory backing, why would they not take that?
The beautiful thing is, with the young fans of the world, if they start winning, they'll jump on board.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's it. I think,
and they're missing the bigger picture. The bigger picture is, the Mustang is a much better looking car as well. So
100%. But you know what? I'll say this. I'm not a fan of the Mustang with the chrome rims.
Yeah, I mean,
black it out.
I'm
black it out.
Who are you going for, H?
He's a walkie.
Yeah, Walkinshaw, mate.
My man. I mean, I don't go for a team, man. I honestly struggle.
No, don't be like that.
I bleed blue.
Like
I bleed blue, so I like Chaz. I mean, my old man grew up. He raced Holdens, he raced Fords, so I can't actually say like, oh, I don't like Holdens, I don't like Ford. It's like, well, he did both. But for me, I like my Fords, and I'm glad to see Chaz, who's one of my good mates and who I support in Supercar, back in a Ford. So I guess I'll go for Walkinshaw. How's that?
My
Sounds good.
I don't like I don't like people jumping
biased
on
bullshit right here, boys.
I don't like people.
Oh, don't be like that. Don't be like that.
Diversify.
No, listen.
You got tick said you'd be right.
I said this to Harry last year. I don't like people jumping on this Walkinshaw train now that we're having some success.
No, true.
Let's have it.
I've always been on a Walkinshaw train. I just never admitted it, I don't think.
I was HRT from back in the day, mate.
True.
The funniest thing I saw this week was my brother caused a bit of a storm on the Dick Johnson Racing page.
Oh, really?
Because they put up a teaser picture of the livery of the car, and he said something like, "Please tell me that this livery has changed for the first time in 5 years or 6 years or something like that." And then some person
commented, "Why would you change something that's perfect?" And then the DJR factory team liked his comment.
Oh no, you got burned, bro.
So my brother sent us a message saying, just had confirmation that the livery is not changing this year. So how'd you get that? And he showed me the comments. Like,
the sad thing is that bloody Bathurst livery that they ran, the old red, like the rainbow shell that they had. Man, I would love to see that on the car again.
No,
could you just control, copy, and paste that onto Red Bull F1's livery release.
Yeah.
Oh, you pretty much could.
Dude, that was so awkward when they released that. They're all just looking at it like, oh, so it's the exact same car. Cool.
And like, what do we talk about?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It's a
I've-
good point. And wait for
I've no
Tickford, mate.
interest-
Wait for the monster car. That's Cam
Monster
Waters,
car to be the same.
it's
Triple
not
Eight to
gonna
be the
it's not gonna
same.
change a whole lot. Luckily last year they put
No.
the chicane tools on the back end of it, so it kind of gave it a little bit of difference. But nah. You know what, boys?
That's true.
This was a good pod.
Yeah.
I think
Been
we'll
good.
leave it there. But the key takeaways have to be Bathurst 12 hours back and back in a big way. That's good for Australian motorsport. Formula One, we'll wait and see, but hopefully it's back.
Nah,
And
should
there's
be
another-
right.
And we've got some Walkinshaw bias for the rest of the year.
Hey, come on.
So
Dude, there's no such thing as bias. We haven't won the championship
Yeah.
yet.
Don't
know,
hate,
we've got-
appreciate.
it's true.
Yeah.
It's true. Okay, fair
we-
enough. But I'm actually looking forward to seeing what Walkinshaw do this year. Like all jokes aside, they've been trending in the right direction. They're in a position now where everybody's got equal machinery and they're kind of not having to chase to catch up to, the.
I think
obviously
Harry just
most
smiled for the
dominant team.
first time tonight.
I'd love to see Chaz, Gizzy, and Cam go head to head 3-way battle.
Yeah, but I
Yeah.
think it'd be
Just all
Cam
year,
first because
every
Cam's
race.
Australia's number one driver.
You know,
remember?
I would love to see. I would love to see.
You remember that
Walkinshaw
pod
come
from
in.
last year
I
where
do.
you guys lost it?
I do. You
No,
said that
I'd
he was the
love-
best driver in the world, I think, at one point.
Yeah,
Which,
some-
I mean,
some
look,
shit
he's
like-
a fantastic driver, but
I think I said Australia, not the world. I wouldn't say the
oh,
world.
I don't know. We might have to
No,
wind back.
think you
if you're
said the
listening, you
world.
might have to find that pod and
Best
paste
Australian
it.
driver in the world, I think it
Yeah,
was.
that's what you
I
said.
think we need to
best
go
Australian
VAR, boys. We've got to
driver.
go video replay.
All I want to say is before we go, with now that we've transitioned to supercars,
Like 15 minutes ago.
yeah, I would love to see Walkinshaw come in and win the championship in a Ford, be the best
Let's do
Ford
it.
team on the grid.
Let's do it.
because
Chaz, I'm
all it
putting
would-
money on you now.
Yeah, come on, Chaz.
All it would mean is that Ford just needed to bring in a Holden team to finally get the job done. So I think it's going to be a good year.
Hey,
Hey,
Tristan,
boys, you know what we didn't mention?
tell us.
Tell me.
Valentino Rossi.
Oh,
We actually didn't even mention it, man.
you know
know
what?
why?
Doctor on the mountain.
'Cause
That
this
speaks
is a-
volumes about how good the race was.
Dude, you got 54,000 people there. They ain't there to see Chaz Mostert. They're there to see Valentino Rossi.
Yeah, I'll say this to you. I went through the pits about 10 o'clock in the morning, and by then all the posters were gone. There was literally nothing left to get from any other teams because it was good. Obviously, people were in the pit lanes. All the
Yeah,
other pit lanes behind them were pretty empty.
I
The
think,
WRT pit lane had literally a posse behind it of
So-
Valentino Rossi groupies, and they were just waiting for
Yeah,
a
man.
glimpse of the man.
I said to my partner, like, I was overwhelmed watching it because I said to my partner, when we were at Bathurst 6 Hour, we had, I think at one point, like Will Davidson, we actually the year before we had Will Davidson, we had Shane Van Gisbergen, I think maybe Brock or someone was, there was a few of them
Steve
dialing
Pasquale
around
was
our
racing
pits.
too, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, there was a few of them dialing around our pits because that's where like most of the supercar drivers were hanging around or whatever. And like there was a bit of a fan, like bit of a congregation going on there. And I said to Hannah, like, you saw what you saw at Bathurst last year, and like look at that. And she goes, "Holy shit, that's insane!" Like that many people just wanting to see this guy in the same room as them. That's just unbelievable. That guy is honestly God. My dad was
gotta
like almost
be-
in
he's gotta-
tears, and he doesn't fanboy over anyone.
He's got to be one of the two, like him and Michael Schumacher would have to be the biggest sporting icons of our generation.
Well,
And
you had Mick doing a pit across from him, who is probably the second or third best argumentatively motorbike rider of all time,
Yeah.
who is just like in awe of this guy who's in the garage next to him and going
But
like,
also-
how good is this for the sport?
But also didn't even really get half the fanfare that, and I
Nah.
suppose I think it's because we see him so much on
We're
TV and stuff.
desensitized to Mick doing now. He's
Yeah, I
just
know.
like he's
Yeah,
he-
'cause we
and
see
he's-
him so
he's-
often.
he's-
He's
'cause-
everywhere
yeah.
where Jack is.
That's it.
Yeah.
My mum got me a Mick Doohan shirt, and it had all these championship like years on it.
Mm.
And I said, did Mick Doohan win this many championships to my dad?
Yeah, I used to get that a lot. Like
I
people
need to
telling
read
me
his
stories about like Mick doing like, oh, I met him and I met him. And I'm like, oh yeah, cool. I used to see him like every weekend at the kart track, like whatever. What are you talking about?
Hey
Like,
Tristan, I've got two jobs for you, mate.
yes, if it's IndyCar, no,
No. Oh, actually, you didn't even watch it last year, did you?
Get on it,
dude.
mate.
It's not. I'll say the same thing. Get on it. No, my two things for you are: number one, try to get Chaz on the pod.
Okay.
Number two, get Mick doing.
Oh.
Mick
Hey Chaz,
Doohan.
if you're listening, get on the pod. Hey Mick, if you're listening, get on the pod. No, look, I'll do my best, boys. I mean, yeah, definitely try with Chaz. I know Chaz quite well, so I'll see if he's got some time to kill. Maybe we can smack down a few Bundies and have a real
Bundy
chat.
Col- maybe we can get a Bundy Cola sponsorship.
Oh,
for
sorry,
the
I mean
pod.
Woodstock. He drinks Woodstock.
Woodstock.
that's
Woodstock
right.
and
Yeah,
cola.
that's right.
Maybe we've just lost it.
No, we'll edit that out.
Yeah, please. No.
Woodstock Cola.
Yo, actually, if Tristan does get Chaz on the pod, we all have to wear Bundy shirts though.
Woodstock.
No, Bundy.
This is
No,
why I'm not
dude,
gonna
I'll
go
definitely
anywhere,
do what I
bro.
can, man. I'll reach out to him. And again, if you are listening, Chaz, if you're a fan of the Racing Line podcast, make sure you hit the boys up, hit me up. Let's make it happen.
If you're one of those 300 listeners, Chaz, we are
Hey, you
very
never
much
know, man.
impressed. All right, boys.
We'll try and make it happen, boys. I'll reach out to a few of my mates as well and see what we can make.
Sounds good.
Let's do it.
Sounds awesome.
All right, man.
Definitely.
That's an hour.
Awesome, boys. Thanks so much for having me on.
Thanks,
Thanks
Tristan.
for
It's always
coming,
good.
Tristan.
It's always good getting a different perspective.
Yeah.
Someone with like you've always got good energy. Whenever you come on our pod, you bring good energy, and we always get off the pod saying, this guy, he's a keeper. So we always
Thanks, bro.
appreciate when you're
I
able
want to make a
jump
quick
on.
shout out to my boy Harry. I keep cutting him off. I think every single time he's gone to speak tonight, I just keep stealing his mic time. So we'll make up for that next time, eh?
You're the
That's
guest,
all right.
mate.
You know what? He could have had more mic time, but he decided not to watch the race. So
True. That's a good point, man.
hey,
That's some
Thanks,
fucking
boys.
serious
Cheers.
shade
Keen
that
for the
is.
next time, eh?
See you guys.
all right, man. Have a good one.
There you
And
guys.
for all the fans out there, hope you enjoyed another episode of the Racing Live podcast. As usual, please like, please subscribe, please share, and have a delicious Bundy and Coke.
And
Have
if
a
you
good
know
night.
Chaz Mostert, reach out and get him on the podcast.
Yeah, give Tristan a break. Thanks, boys.
See you guys.